Most people drive through Ohio. They do not stop. Flat highways, farm fields, a few cities, and then the next state. What they miss is that the ground under all of it is one of the densest collections of ancient monuments on the continent, and that we still cannot fully explain most of it. On this list, there is a quarter-mile snake of earth coiled on the rim of a meteor crater, built by people we still cannot name. There is a 2,000-year-old observatory for tracking the moon that spent 100 years as a private golf course. There is a city of the dead that the U.S. Army bulldozed flat to build a training camp. And there is a town so taken with a perfect ancient circle that it built itself inside it, then tore the circle down. That snake on the crater is number one on this list, and the question of who made it has gone unanswered for more than 100 years. Stick with us to the end for it. This is Forgotten Ground, where we dig into the places history walked right past. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. We go down a research rabbit hole like this every week. Today we are counting down 10 ancient structures in Ohio that no one can fully explain. Number 10. Inscription rock. The carvings that are disappearing. Off the south shore of Kelly's Island in the western basin of Lake Erie, there is a slab of limestone about 32 feet by 21. Its surface is covered in carvings, human faces, birds, animals, symbols that no one has been able to read. We do not know who made them. The best estimate is the late prehistoric period, somewhere between roughly 1200 and 1600 AD, by people we can only name as possibilities. The Sandusky culture perhaps, or the Erie. The figures were pecked into soft stone at the water's edge, possibly as a teaching rock, a surface where sacred knowledge was passed down. When settlers found it in 1833, it was half buried in the shoreline sand and the carvings were sharp. They are not sharp now. More than a century of weather, freeze and thaw and spray off the lake has worn them down. Today the slab sits under a protective roof on a viewing platform with an interpretive drawing posted beside it so visitors can make out what the stone is losing. And there is a small, quiet irony in that. The sign explaining the carvings is now easier to read than the 800-year-old carvings themselves. There was a second inscribed rock once, on the island's north shore. Granite, not limestone, it is simply gone. People will tell you quarry workers dynamited it, though local historians say that story has never actually held up. Either way, it vanished. You can still reach Inscription Rock by ferry from Marblehead in season when the island is awake. It is one of only 3 protected petroglyph sites in the entire state. A message carved in stone to outlast its makers, slowly going blank while we watch. Number 9. The Tarleton Cross Mound. The perfect cross no one claims. On a wooded ridge above Salt Creek in Fairfield County, there is an earthen cross. 4 arms, each about 12 feet wide and 45 feet long, laid out in a clean plus sign about 90 feet across and only 3 feet high. The arms point almost exactly to north, south, east, and west. Archaeologists will tell you plainly that they do not know who built it. They do not know when. They do not know why. That is not a marketing line. There are no definitive excavation records, and no artifacts have ever come out of it to tie it to a culture. It could be Hopewell. It could be Fort Ancient. It could be someone else entirely. For nearly 2 centuries, the cross has refused to answer. The shape itself is part of the problem. Ohio's ancient earthworks are circles, squares, octagons, animals. A clean, symmetrical cross is almost unheard of, which is exactly why no one can comfortably place it. And there is a stranger detail in how it was made. Most mounds were built up, basket of earth on basket of earth. Researchers think at least one arm of this cross was made the opposite way, by digging the surrounding ground away and leaving the shape standing, carved out, not piled up. When Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis mapped it in the 1840s, they noted a stone pile beside it and called it an altar. They also recorded a deep pit at the center, about 20 feet deep, they said. Modern measurement puts that central depression at about 12 inches. The altar they drew is gone now. The 20-foot pit was never really there. Today the cross sits in Cross Mound Park, behind a low split-rail fence, reached by a swaying 1936 footbridge over the creek. It was closed to the public for years and reopened in 2017. It is so understated that you can walk straight past it without realizing what you are looking at. A near-perfect symbol, aligned to the compass, that has kept its meaning to itself for 200 years of people staring at it. Number 8. The Alligator Mound. The animal nobody can name. It is named after an animal that has never lived in Ohio. That is the first clue that something here does not add up. On a high bluff over the Raccoon Creek Valley, near Granville, a four-legged earthen creature stretches more than 200 feet long and stands 4 to 5 feet high. It has a round head, a body, legs, and a long tail that curls at the end. Early settlers looked at it and called it the alligator. The name stuck. The trouble is that it does not really look like an alligator, and alligators were never here. So what is it? After 175 years of study, there is still no agreement. People have proposed an opossum, a raccoon, a flying squirrel, a lizard or salamander, a panther, a fisher. One leading Ohio archaeologist argues it depicts the underwater panther, a powerful water spirit from native tradition, and that settlers simply garbled a native description of a fierce water creature into the word alligator. Others push back on even that. The honest answer is that nobody knows what animal this is. It is one of only 2 effigy mounds in the entire state. The other is Serpent Mound, and the two were built in a similar way. An earthen figure laid over a kind of stone skeleton. When Squire and Davis surveyed this one in 1848, they did not reach for a theory. They just called it strange. The dating is unsettled too. Charcoal from the base, tested in 1999, came back around 1,000 years old, pointing to the Fort Ancient culture near AD 950, though an older, Adena origin is still argued. A fifth limb that early surveys recorded has been lost in the centuries since. As for where it sits today, this 1,000-year-old sacred effigy, whose own identity remains an open question, now crowns the top of a cul-de-sac inside a modern housing subdivision. You reach it by driving up through the suburb, past the houses, to the crest, a sacred animal that has kept its own name a secret, watching the neighborhood from the highest hill. Number 7. The Miamisburg Mound. Ohio's tallest secret. It rises 65 feet out of the ground, a cone of earth on top of a 100-foot bluff above the Great Miami River, visible from miles away. It is the tallest conical mound in Ohio and one of the 2 largest in eastern North America. The other is Grave Creek Mound, just across the river in West Virginia. The numbers carry the story here. 65 feet tall. Around 800 feet of circumference at the base. An estimated 54,000 cubic yards of earth inside it. To build it, the Adena moved that earth one basket at a time, by hand, uphill, the equivalent of more than 3,000 modern dump trucks. And they did not do it all at once. Each time an honored leader died, a wooden mortuary structure was raised, sometimes ceremonially burned, then covered over with fresh earth. The cone grew taller and wider across generations, sometime between 800 BC and AD 100. It is, in the most literal sense, a monument built out of grief and ceremony, layer on layer. In 1869, excavators got curious and bored a vertical shaft straight down through the center. About 8 feet down, they found a skeleton wrapped in bark. Far deeper, a log-lined vault. Along the way, layers of ash and stone, and about 24 feet down, a layer of flat stones overlapping like roof shingles, hinting that the mound may once have had a stone facing. That single dig is also why it stands 65 feet today instead of its original 68 or 70. They lowered it just by digging into it, and it will stay a secret in one specific way. The mound has never been fully excavated, so no one knows how many people are buried inside it. Now no one ever will. Federal law protecting native burials means the rest of it stays sealed. You can visit. There are 116 concrete steps up the side to an observation platform on top. The inventor Charles Kettering bought the mound and turned it into a public park back in 1920. A grave so large that its full population is a number we have quietly agreed never to learn. Number 6. The Marietta Earthworks. The mounds the town was built around. In 1788, a group of Revolutionary War veterans came down the Ohio River and founded Marietta, the first permanent American town in the Northwest Territory. They arrived to find the ground already occupied, not by people, but by enormous earthworks that had stood there for roughly 2,000 years. Squares, platform mounds, a graded avenue running down to the river, a 30-foot burial cone ringed by a ditch. They had no idea who built it, so they did something unusual. Instead of plowing it under for farmland, they built their town around it and gave the ancient features Latin names as if they were the ruins of Rome. The burial cone became the conaas. The platform mounds became the quadranao and the capitolium. The wide ceremonial ramp down to the Muskingum River, 680 feet long, 150 feet wide, they named the Sacra Via, the Sacred Way. The Hopewell who actually built it, somewhere around 100 BC to AD 500, had aligned the Sacra Via and the ramps of those mounds to the sunset of the winter solstice. The veterans handing out Latin names did not know that part. They just knew it was worth keeping and set the mounds aside as protected public squares, in what is cited as the earliest preservation law west of the Appalachians. It did not always go smoothly. At one point, a reverend leasing the quadranao mound simply started plowing it down until public outcry in the court stopped him. What makes the place quietly remarkable is what survived. The Conus burial mound still stands, inside Mound Cemetery, surrounded by more buried Revolutionary War officers than any other cemetery in the country, including the men who founded the town. And the Capitolium platform mound is still there because in 1916 they built the Washington County Public Library directly on top of it. So in one small Ohio city, you can climb a 2,000-year-old mound ringed by the graves of 1,700 soldiers, then walk a few blocks and borrow a book from a building standing on another one. The dead of 3 different eras stacked on the same ground, and everyone agreed to leave them be. If you are finding this one interesting, take a second and hit like. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And tell me in the comments which of these you would actually want to stand on. We read them. We have covered the strange and the quiet so far. From here, the stakes get heavier. Number 5. The Circleville Earthworks. The town that erased its own circle. Start with what is no longer there. 2,000 years ago, a Hopewell community built a giant, precise circle on this spot, joined to an equally precise square. The circle was about 1,100 feet across. The square about 900 feet on a side. We do not know why they built it. We barely got the chance to ask because of what happened next. In 1810, settlers founded the county seat of Pickaway County here, on that exact spot. And they were so taken with the ancient circle that they did something no other American town did. They built their whole town inside it. The town director, Daniel Dreisbach, laid out Circleville as 2 concentric circular streets, joined by streets radiating from the center like spokes on a wheel. At the dead center, on the original earthwork, he set an 8-sided courthouse. The town was a circle, named for a circle, built on a circle. For about 20 years, it was the strangest town plan in the country. And then the residents got tired of it. The curved pie-slice lots were awkward to build on. Odd wedges of land went to waste. The whole round design started to feel, in the language of the day, like childish sentimentalism. So they unmade it. In 1837, the Ohio legislature chartered a company for a single purpose, to take the circle apart. It was literally named the Circleville Squaring Company. Over several phases, finishing around 1856, they demolished the circular streets, demolished the ancient earthwork underneath, and replaced all of it with a plain rectangular grid. The octagonal courthouse came down. The 2,000-year-old circle was leveled. The only trace of the original alignment is the line of Main Street. Here is the detail that lands. The phrase squaring the circle is a famous geometry problem, turning a circle into a square of equal area with only a compass and a straight edge. Mathematicians chased it for centuries, and in 1882 it was finally proven impossible. But the people of Circleville had already done it, decades earlier, in dirt and brick, by physically destroying one of the largest geometric monuments in the Scioto Valley to be rid of the inconvenience of a curve. Today there is nothing to photograph, No mound, no wall, no ring. Just an ordinary Ohio town, a street grid, the town's own name, and a few old drawings and museum models that show what used to be there. You have to be told that a perfect ancient circle once stood exactly where you are standing. A monument that survived 2,000 years, undone in 20 by people who simply found it inconvenient. Number 4. The Mound City Group. The city of the dead that was bulldozed for an army camp. Near Chillicothe, on a flat green floodplain beside the Scioto River, the Hopewell built something close to a necropolis. Inside a single low earthen wall, they raised about 23 burial mounds, one of the greatest concentrations of Hopewell burial mounds known anywhere. Each one began as a wooden building where a leader's body was cremated, often with treasures traded from across the continent. Copper from the Great Lakes, mica, shell from the Gulf. Then the building was sealed under earth. Mound after mound between roughly 200 BC and AD 500. A place built entirely for the dead. It survived almost intact for 2,000 years. It did not survive 1917. That year, with the country entering the First World War, the U.S. Army leased 9,700 acres here and built Camp Sherman, the third largest training camp in the country, about 2,000 buildings. The roads, the barracks, the latrines went straight over Mound City. The Army graded the ancient mounds flat to make room. In wartime, almost no one stopped to argue. And then something happened that is hard to believe. The city came back. Decades earlier, in 1846, two men named Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis had carefully mapped and measured every mound. After the war, when Camp Sherman was dismantled, archaeologists realized something. The leveling had scraped off the mounds, but the burial floors underneath had been protected, sealed below the new flat ground. Using the 1846 drawings, they excavated those floors and then physically rebuilt the mounds where the map said they had stood. President Warren Harding made it a national monument in 1923. So the Mound City you can walk through today is a reconstruction, a 2,000-year-old burial ground that was erased and then resurrected from 70-year-old pencil surveys. The reconstruction came at a cost the maps could not fix. Many of the treasures pulled from those mounds over the years were scattered, sold as souvenirs. Some ended up overseas in the British Museum. Today it is the heart of Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, run by the National Park Service, and in 2023 it became part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the same list as the pyramids and Stonehenge. One mound has been left open so visitors can see the pattern of post holes from the wooden building that once stood beneath it. A city of the dead, flattened by the living for a war and brought back to the surface by a set of old drawings. Number 3. Fort Ancient. The fort that was never a fort. It is the largest prehistoric hilltop enclosure in North America. 3.5 miles of earthen walls, 18,000 feet, wrapped around a plateau above the Little Miami River, enclosing somewhere between 100 and 126 acres. The Hopewell built it, basket by basket, over roughly 400 years, about 2,000 years ago. And almost everything about its name is wrong. When European settlers found these walls running for miles around a hilltop, they assumed the only thing walls like that could be: a fort, a defensive structure. They named the site Fort Ancient. The mistake went further than a label on a map. When archaeologists later identified a completely different, much later native culture in the region, they named that culture after this site too. So a misread set of ceremonial walls ended up giving its name to an entire people who had nothing to do with building them. The walls were Hopewell. The culture we call Fort Ancient came centuries later and moved in, because it was never a fort at all. Modern work shows it was a ceremonial place, a gathering place, and a remarkably precise one. There is a gap in the wall where, on the morning of the summer solstice, the sun rises directly through the opening. Limestone-capped mounds line up with both the summer and winter solstice sunrises. There is even evidence the builders were tracking the moon's long rhythm, the same 18.6-year cycle worked into other Ohio earthworks. Inside the North Fort, 4 low mounds form a near-perfect square, 512 feet on each side. Their limestone caps had been burned, and not lightly. The fires set on them were intense enough that the fossils in the stone turned white. Something happened on those mounds that mattered enough to scorch rock pale. Today it is preserved as Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve, and it holds another title, Ohio's oldest state park, established in 1891. About 3 miles of trail run along the embankments, though you are asked not to walk on the walls themselves. In 2023, it joined the UNESCO World Heritage List with the other Hopewell sites. A people built a calendar out of earth and stone, 3.5 miles around, and the only thing later arrivals could imagine it being was a place to hide behind and fight. Number 2. The Newark Octagon Earthworks. The Lunar Observatory under a golf course. 2,000 years ago, on a plain at Newark, the Hopewell laid out an enormous octagon, joined to a perfect circle covering about 50 acres. Each of the octagon's 8 walls runs roughly 550 feet long, and the whole thing is aimed at the sky. Its walls and openings align with the points on the horizon where the moon rises and sets, and not on a yearly cycle. On the moon's full cycle, which takes 18.6 years to complete and return to the same point. The Ohio History Connection describes the place as part cathedral, part cemetery, part astronomical observatory. Think about what that takes. To build that alignment, you have to watch the moon carefully for at least 18 years, probably across generations, and then encode what you learned into earthen walls 1/3 of a mile long. The people who did it had no writing and no central government that we know of. They worked out the rhythm of the moon and carved it into the ground. Now here is the part that is almost too strange to be true. For more than 100 years, people played golf on it. In 1910, the Mound Builders Country Club leased the Octagon and laid a private golf course over and among the ancient walls. For over a century, members teed off across a 2,000-year-old lunar observatory. For most of that time, the public, including the native descendants of the people who built it, could get onto the grounds only a few days a year. That finally broke in the courts. In December 2022, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the state, through the Ohio History Connection, could reclaim the lease by eminent domain and open the site to everyone. The next year, in 2023, the Octagon became part of Ohio's first UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of 8 Hopewell sites on the list, alongside Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. And the Octagon is only a fragment of what once stood here. The wider Newark complex covered around 3,000 acres. Less than 10% survives, about 200 acres, including the separate Great Circle, 1,200 feet across. A monument to the patience of watching the moon for 2 decades. Fenced off for 100 years so a handful of people could play through. Number 1. The Great Serpent Mound. The snake on the crater. You come up into the hills of Adams County near Peebles on a road that climbs and narrows. You park and you walk out onto the spine of a ridge above Ohio Brush Creek. It is quiet up here. Wind, mostly. And then beside the path, the ground begins to move. A ridge of earth, about 3 feet high, uncoils along the very top of the bluff. It curves one way, then back the other, 7 times in long, smooth bends until it ends in a tightly wound triple coil, a tail. At the other end, the form opens into a wide oval like a mouth around an egg. From the observation tower, the whole shape resolves at once. It is a snake, a 1/4 of a mile of snake laid into the land. The largest serpent effigy on Earth. Stand there long enough and the questions arrive in order. Who made this? When? Why here? And the honest, almost unbelievable answer, after more than a century of study, is that we are still arguing about all 3. Here is what we can say. The serpent is about 1,348 feet long, built up from earth over a foundation of stone and clay. It holds no burials and gave up no artifacts. When the Harvard archaeologist Frederick Ward Putnam dug into it in the late 1800s, the snake itself contained nothing that could date it. That single fact is why the mystery has never closed. The dating has swung back and forth for decades. Because Adena burial mounds sit nearby, early researchers assumed the Adena built it. Then, in 1991, radiocarbon testing of charcoal pointed to a much later date, around AD 1070, which would make it the work of the Fort Ancient culture. Then a 2014 study, supported again in 2019, swung it back toward the Adena, around 300 BC. Both camps still hold ground. The most common middle position is that one culture may have built it and another later repaired it. No one can give you a single certain birthday for the most famous ancient snake in the world. Even the head is unsettled. That oval at the mouth, some read it as an egg being swallowed, some as the sun, some as a frog, some as a giant eye. Take your pick. The people who would know left no explanation. And then there is the ground it sits on. The Serpent runs along the rim of what geologists call the Serpent Mound crater. A real confirmed meteorite impact structure about 5 miles across, less than 320 million years old. When that object struck, it shattered and warped the bedrock for miles and shoved the center of the Earth upward by at least 1,000 feet, roughly the height of the Chrysler Building. The builders had no possible way to detect any of that, and yet they chose this exact warped, broken ground, this scar from the sky, to lay down their serpent. There is one more coincidence people cannot let go of. The Fort Ancient Era date, around 1070, lands close to 1066, the year Halley's Comet blazed across the sky, a bright head with a long trailing tail. Some researchers suggest the serpent records that comet, written into the earth. It is a theory, not a fact, but it is hard to unsee once you have heard it. Today the serpent is still there, preserved as Serpent Mound State Memorial, with a small museum and that observation tower. It is a National Historic Landmark. Unlike the Hopewell sites earlier on this list, it is not a World Heritage Site, only a candidate for one. But none of that is what stays with you. What stays with you is the silence on the ridge, and a quarter-mile snake that has held its shape and its secret on the rim of an ancient wound in the planet, still waiting for the rest of us to work out what it was trying to say. Ohio is not flat, empty drive-through country. It holds one of the densest concentrations of ancient architecture on the continent, in cemeteries, city parks, golf courses, and suburbs. For me, the one that lingers is Circleville. A perfect circle that stood 2,000 years and was erased in 20 until only a street name was left. Which one surprised you most? Which did we miss? If you want more forgotten ground like this, subscribe. We keep digging it up.